It's already been half a year since I made my 1 year of development video, and since then I've made, well, very few proper updates on the progress of my game. For those of you in the Discord server, link down below of course, or people who regularly join the live streams, you'll have some idea on the progress that we've made over the last months. But let's talk about where the game is right now, how it has evolved, and where we're headed in this project. After rewriting a large portion of my combat code and then redoing almost all of the animations in the game and just generally improving the feel of the character, I wanted to make sure that I could actually make some progress with the game. You see, so far I've only really had the tutorial, which will need a significant rework in the future as well. But for now, it works. And once the game as a whole is complete, I'll go back and redo the tutorial areas where needed. In my 1 year recap devlog, I teased a map layout for the first dungeon that I will be working on. And I'm happy to show you that for the most part, that dungeon is now done. As we speak, I'm working on the model for the boss fight. And 2 out of 3 keys to unlock the boss room are placed down in the dungeon themselves. So it's pretty close to being done. As a quick refresher for you all, in my game there will be a number of connected dungeons that you can do in any order you like. The goal is to defeat the boss and gain its weapon. In order to get to the boss, you need to collect 3 keys. 1 gained from a combat challenge, 1 gained from a platforming level, and the last from a puzzle room. The idea being that platforming and puzzles will provide a little bit of variation for the gameplay, aside from just constantly fighting enemies, which does get stale at some point. But as I started to work for the puzzle in this dungeon, I'll be honest, I kind of just got frustrated with the code and gave up. But that frustration led to a actually better idea. Instead of doing puzzles, which are hard to come up with in the first place, a unique puzzle for every single dungeon in the game, maybe it is better to make minigames for each dungeon. Something as simple as like a shooting gallery or a simple racing game. Nothing more complicated than your average Mario Party minigame, for the most part. The idea itself might have come from a place of frustration and not being able to get my puzzles to work, but that then led to something that I now actually think is a better idea than the original puzzles altogether. More fun for the players, but also for me as a developer. It gives me a chance to spice things up a little bit. After doing a lot of level design and enemy creation, AI coding and all that kind of stuff, it'll be nice to have to go through a whole micro-sized game development cycle to make a minigame. Sort of like allowing myself to work on a side project, but instead of it just being a side project that doesn't really go anywhere, it actually just slots neatly into the full game. I also finally started work on the weapon system as a whole. I now have the default sword and a scythe, as well as a nice system that runs custom particles for each specific weapon when you switch between them. I even made a special ability for the scythe already, where you pull in the enemies nearby towards you and then hit them all at once with one powerful attack, which is only like 90% a clone of what Magnet Burst does in Kingdom Hearts 2. It's one of my favorite moves in that game, okay? But now with this system in place, it should be really easy to add in the other weapons. I just have to model them and animate the attack animations for them, and create each one's special ability using the gameplay ability system, and then make the dungeons where you can obtain them. Speaking of dungeons though, since I'm so close to finishing up this first proper dungeon, at least a first draft, it's still pretty bare when it comes to things like art assets, but I'll look into that later. I've started drawing the dungeon layouts for the other dungeons now, and hopefully these won't take me 6 months each, because otherwise I'll be working on this game for, well, just way too long. In all seriousness though, I expect most of these dungeons to take 2 or 3 months per dungeon to make, because I don't have to rework my whole combat system from the ground up again, hopefully. And by now I have a pretty decent workflow as to how I put together these dungeons. Before moving on to the next part of this list, let's take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, BlenderKit. BlenderKit is a huge online subscription-based platform which allows you to download the tens of thousands of assets in their library, ranging from simple models and materials to HDRs and entire scenes. They even have a handful of cool add-ons, and of course my favorite being the hundreds upon hundreds of different brushes that they offer. Join BlenderKit today, improve your 3D art, and make your entire workflow just that bit more optimized. Through the link down below in the description, you can get 10% off your first month. Well, that said though, I do want to leave a little bit of room for experimentation. Take the boss fights, for instance. At the moment, the boss fights, their AI runs on a behavior tree, the same as all my normal enemies do. But boss fights in video games tend to have different phases, which is kind of a pain to properly do inside a behavior tree. Since, as the name suggests, it's a tree-like structure which decides behavior, always starting at the root of the tree and then going through a series of checks and conditions to go down different branches and pick the actual behavior it should run. Of course, you can make a branch for every phase of the boss, and inside of those phases you can make all of the states that the boss can be in, like a passive state, an aggressive state, a recharging state, and so on. But that makes the tree grow huge, because you're just duplicating a lot of code around, and then when you want to change something in one of those phases, you need to go through all the other phases as well and change it there too. Instead, what might make more sense for a boss fight is a state machine based system. Instead of running this tree constantly, a state machine just lets your AI move from state to state depending on some checks and conditions that are set up as well. But if nothing changes, it just stays around in the state that is currently in. Now you can make a state for each of the phases, and all of those phases can then be their own sub-state machine, a state machine within a state machine, that have all of these states within that phase. I'm still looking into this idea. Unreal Engine has a system called state trees, which, as far as I can see, is pretty much what I need for this purpose. So experiments like that will take up some extra time, and I'm sure this won't be the last of its kind to pop up and derail me a little bit during development either. For instance, my level loading system. Well, I'm not going to rework the entire thing from the ground up. At the moment, what happens is I walk up to a door. That door holds a value with the name of the level that should be loaded. It starts loading that level and fades in a loading screen. When that level finishes loading, which is pretty quickly usually, the player gets placed near the door in the new level that has the same name stored on it of the level that was just unloaded. And then the loading screen fades out. That's all fine, and I really like that system, but let me tell you, it is a nightmare to supply every single door in your game with a proper name of the level that it should be loading. One typo on either side of this system and you're entirely screwed. So, the whole system works fine. I love that you automatically get put right next to the door that connects to the level that you just came from, without me having to do anything for that while doing level design. But I need to replace those names with something else, man, because you can't just load levels through a special level variable, which just lets you choose from a drop-down menu instead of having to type out the names every single time. I have no idea why I thought this was a good idea when I made it. So don't expect me to build the whole rest of the game and have this released before the end of 2024. If this thing is ready for release in 2025, I would be surprised. But hey, that just means there's going to be a lot of content to show you guys how I progress through this game. So go ahead and subscribe below this video, and if you want to support me in the development of this game, you can go over to the Patreon page or become a YouTube member. Especially if you yourself are an Unreal Engine developer, I think you're going to like it quite a lot around here. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page. And a special thanks to my Cave Digger tier Patreons, Sir J. Thomas,